Hi, this is Dr. Dan Ratner. As part of our how-to series, we're going to look at some of the contradictions mind-body sufferers may find in the recommendations they hear in the field and how to resolve them. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally. I've been thinking about this a lot recently, but I keep thinking about videos that will help you guys understand better what it is you're supposed to be doing and how you're supposed to get better. So here's the thing. I hear this all the time, that there are so many contradictions out there in the field. And not only do I hear it all the time, I experienced it myself. So in the mind-body field, what we're often saying is that information is what gets people better. So why is it so confusing? Because it really is. And I want to empathize with you guys out there. You're trying to make sense of it. You're hearing different things. You might even hear me saying things that sound confusing to you. And what that means is we need to do a better job of explaining it. So everyone in the mind-body field means well, but I think we all have a tendency to either make it too complicated or sometimes too simple. And what it needs to be is clear. And these inconsistencies need to be smoothed out. So this video is going to try to do some of that, to talk about some of why the contradictions come up and how to think about it. So as an example, people talk about how complex the brain is. And I don't disagree with that. The brain is very complex, but if you get lost in that web, then suddenly it's too complicated and you can't make sense of it. Whereas there are actually basic rules that the brain always follows. No matter how complex it is, it follows those rules. As an example, you have to sleep to be able to function. That's a basic rule that the brain follows. The context of sleep and what happens physiologically, that's very complicated, but you don't need to know the complicated stuff to be able to get the basic rules and know what to do. So, as I said, the physiology is complex, but the logic is not. The logic does not have to be complex. We know what human beings are like and we can follow that. Here's another example. When you have an emotion, the results in the body are instantaneous. When you're sad, you cry right away. When you're embarrassed, you blush right away. These are rules of the body, and I don't care how complicated the body is or how complicated the mind is, and they both are extremely complicated entities, but their processes are still logical and consistent, and that's part of how you can get an organized system that makes sense. Here's another example. When you have fear, your entire sympathetic nervous system is revved up. That's true all the time for every person. So even though it's a complex experience or it's a complex physiological response, that doesn't mean what we can understand about it is too complex or needs to be so complex. And I think a lot of times we confuse the two. Just because it's a complicated process in the body doesn't mean it's a complicated process for what it means for your symptoms. So, as I said, all these things I said, they're always true. It's just not that complicated. Sometimes, though, you're getting the message that things are too simple. As an example, people will say, well, if you want to get better from mind-body symptoms, you need to know your emotions, period. And that's all they say. Well, actually, that's too simple because we find this all the time. The people who are journaling and working at feelings for years. In fact, this is a problem that we find in the therapeutic world of psychology and social work. People can go over and over the symptoms, but if they're not understanding it in a new way, well, then it's being too simplified. And you're not getting where you need to go. So we need rules of thumb there too. Otherwise, this leaves people beating their heads against a brick wall. And that is absolutely not something I want, literally or figuratively. So here's another thing that is a contradiction or something that people tell me, I don't know how to make sense of it. What about the differences between people and how they process things? Well, this is one of the reasons I like my system, is that I build in the fact that we have to work with the individual mind. But it doesn't have to be so complicated because there's a lot of overlap between minds, even though they're different. So I have rules of thumb for types of people or types of situations or types of mind-body processes. These rules of thumb can help make the contradictions understandable, or seeming contradictions, because actually they end up not contradicting if you're doing a good job of explaining it. The thing is, in the mind-body world, and certainly outside of it, we are not conveying some of the basic aspects of things. We give emotions too much power. A lot of times everyone's saying the same things, but in different ways, and sometimes we're saying one thing without remembering to say, wait a minute, this other part is another part that I'm always bringing in. we have to do a better job, and I'm talking about the practitioners, not you sufferers out there. We have to do a better job of organizing the system so that you can understand how it works. This is why I talk about the columns. The columns organize us so that when I'm saying one thing that's about the emotions column, it could be contradictory with something that happens in the doubt column, but at least it's organized so that it's not a contradiction. It's just two different states of being. I'll get more into that in a little bit. Some people are also saying very different things. You're going to hear different things in the mind-body community. And again, I'm mostly talking about the mind-body community because outside of the mind-body community, we're getting information that often is completely faulty. In the mind-body community, we're often getting very good information, but sometimes it's a partial picture. Or it's understanding a certain thing, but then doesn't explain another. So when people are saying different things, in the end, I rely on science and logic. It should always win out. I hold myself to that model too. If my model doesn't win out in science and logic over somebody else's ideas, then I go to those other ideas and I figure out, how do I incorporate that? Because that's better. This has happened to me many times, including with Sarno. There were certain things that he said that didn't fit as well as maybe some other piece did. And so I've created a system that took some of the best things I found in mind, body, science, and logic and put them together. So here's one thing that I have found. I think that science is fantastic and so important. We cannot make advances in these parts of our lives without science being behind it. I'm a big believer in that. I don't want anyone taking it on faith. This is supposed to be about information, true information that are facts, and that's science. But let's not forget, it's also logic. Sometimes there's actually more emphasis on science than logic, and I actually find a lot of times it's logic that's going to get us through. Logic that contradicts science doesn't work, and neither does science that contradicts logic. And here's an example with neural pathways. Neural pathways do exist. They do play a role in things, but it's my observation that it doesn't make a whole lot of logical sense that people get very grooved neural pathways that they can't change quickly, because we see people change quickly all the time from aha moments. This is an example where I'm saying that science does not fit with the logic. It's got to be science and logic. And a lot of times we're relying on one or the other. If one contradicts the other, we're in trouble. We need to start thinking in ways that work for both. So neural pathways do exist in science. They're really happening. But the logic shows us they can change fast. So are they likely to be grooved things that are stuck? I would say not. It doesn't fit with what we see. Another reason we get into contradictions, practitioners are afraid to be more definitive. With science and logic, though, why should we be so afraid of that? Sometimes I feel that people are saying, oh, prove to me that these things exist. And that is my job. I'm supposed to prove it. Sometimes it's with science. Sometimes it's with logic. Sometimes it's with personal experience. But as we work at it, I'm not afraid to be definitive about something that I know to be true, because the science and logic and my personal experience, as well as the experience of other people, fits with everything. I wouldn't have been able to get hundreds of people better from this and other people in the field doing that also if we weren't at least partially right. And I think the limitations that, make us consider whether we're not right fully are actually just hang-ups in the process, not because we're not right. So with science and logic, we shouldn't be afraid to be definitive. It's like trying to prove to people that gravity exists. Well, I don't need to worry too much about, I certainly need to worry about how I present it so that they can see it. But in the end, I know I'm arguing for truth. Gravity exists. You drop something, it falls. Here's another reason contradictions come up. We are way too focused on answers. Now, that may sound really weird because, of course, we do need answers. But what we really need first is to raise the good questions so they can be answered accurately. You cannot get answers without raising the right questions. And I think a lot of times we try to find our best answer, but I don't like to settle for just an answer. I want one that satisfies all my questions. And as a result, if I have any question, I raise it. I'm going to do a video next week, actually, on the importance of questions. And they're really very central in the dialogue between the sufferer and the person who's helping them. You've got to get those questions raised. Every question is important. Here's another reason for contradictions. Mind-body symptoms behave differently at different times or in different circumstances. So as a result, you're not going to find one-size-fits-all rules. So for people who say, oh, it's all about the neural pathways, or it's all about emotions, or it's all about this, it's never all about one thing, because there's lots of different ways that the mind-body exist. But just so that I don't leave you in a place where you feel like, uh-oh, now it's too complicated to solve, that's not true, because remember I said there are rules and guidelines that we can follow. I think as a mind-body community, our responsibility to you as a sufferer is to put those guidelines out in a very clear way that you can follow. So I'm going to do some of the laying that out. But first I'm going to talk about the problems we need to recognize to do a better job outlining for you. So first of all, as I said, I made reference to this before, but I'm going to say it again. There are actually different problems that can be identified. So it's not like the problem is mind-body issues. That's too general, because there are different kinds of problems. This is how I developed the columns. I realized these are 3 major areas of problems. There's emotions and what they do to you in the mind-body process, if they're causing a problem. There's doubt, which also has different parts to it. Again, just for review, that's fear, questions, confusion, or lack of certainty. That's the different areas of doubt. Then there's power. I came up with these different columns because there's different problems that come up. There's even mind-body issues that are more attentionally focused. So I have solutions to each individual problem, and that's what we need, is a very flexible system that also is one that understands a lot. So you all have individual minds, and everyone is okay just how they are. This is something I want to reassure you. There is never going to be anything wrong with any one mind that means they can't break through. My job is to figure out how to make something work for particular types of minds, and that's part of how my system works also. There are multiple ways of accessing what we need to do. There's different profiles. Some people have acute issues that come up around emotions. Remember, it's the onset and uptick of symptoms that leads to emotions. Some people have chronic issues that are about fear and doubt, and sometimes those chronic conditions can be pain. Sometimes they could be a persistent nagging cough. We have to call into question what we think fits and what doesn't, because in my experience, as long as you're cleared by a doctor, it all can apply. Some people have a profile that's all about power, and there are ways to recognize which is which. That's what I'm trying to tell you, is that anybody you're seeing in the mind-body field should have a system that holds together. And I've taken things from different people's systems because a lot of people have discovered different things. I've also kind of come up with things myself as a person who suffered 8 years of back pain myself, and then had to get relief, some of it through working myself or reading things. So here's another type of problem. A lot of times people hit a plateau and they're getting better, but suddenly they hit a plateau and they start to think, well, I guess this is just complicated. Please try not to give in to the idea that it is too complicated to master. There's always something you can understand well enough. Plateaus are how I got to the idea of the column of power. The basic thing I can tell you is, at least if you're following my program, there are main conceptual issues to understand about yourself and about how mind-body experience works. As an example, is yours based in unconscious emotion? Is yours based in fear and doubt? Is yours based in not having what you want, the power column? Is yours more attentionally based, meaning I can't stop paying attention to the symptoms, and as a result, I'm always revved up and stuck in them? You also need to resolve, what do you particularly need to resolve to get better? So again, I'm going to highlight this in a video next week, but you have the answers right in your own questions. So it's important to remember, we all have a different mind-body process. There are similarities and overarching themes that I can give you, overarching rules, and then there are specifics about you. And the way to get the answers to the questions is to be able to ask them. You literally have to get them articulated. So there are different solutions for different profiles. What I often do when I have my consultations is I have to assess the problem right to get the solution. So when you first come in to see me, or if you would come to a seminar with me, or even if I'm just emailing with you, I'm always trying to get to what's the problem that we're dealing with. We can't get to the right solution without knowing what the problem is. And because of these rules of thumb that operate all the time and it not actually being that complicated, we can get to that. So what you need is just some simple guidelines for the type of mind-body setup you have. That's one thing that I can certainly help with. And if you need to reach out to me, please do. You can email me at dan@crushingdoubt.org. You can comment below. I will get back to people personally. It's all about having a dialogue until you understand what are the guidelines. How does this all work? And we need a flexible system because mind-body issues shift all the time. They're always trying to cause doubt. So if we have a system that has rules and that is flexible, but also can be specific, they don't have to contradict necessarily. I think what a lot of you are finding is there's a lot of contradiction out there that leaves you wondering. That is part of how I've started to try to develop my system so that you can understand how to work with all of these different things. You do need to know these basic rules, and I provide a set of rules, and there are things that I talk about frequently that can help you organize your experience and put to rest some apparent contradictions, because a lot of times they don't actually contradict. So let's review some of them. I have 3 columns, as you all know, to separate out types of problems. Many of the other people in the mind-body field, and certainly elsewhere, leave it all merged, and that makes it unclear. I find that it's very helpful to break it down into its parts, as long as it's accurate. The reason I've been able to do it is that it is accurate. But I have set rules that never change. They fit with science and logic. If they go against either one of those, I can't have them as a rule. Another thing that I do, I continue to learn to get things more and more specific. And I also say things over and over because you guys, like I did, I needed repetition. I needed to remember these rules and think about them. Emotions relate to onsets and upticks. I say this all the time. Emotions have instant results, meaning you develop a symptom instantly along with that emotion. Hitting on the right emotion resolves the symptoms immediately, but it needs to be specific. I want to underline that again. A lot of times people are looking for the right emotion, but they end up saying something like, it's about validation. But what happened? Who didn't validate you? And in what way? Was it about not being seen? Or was it about not being believed? Those are 2 totally different things, and they're specific. Doubt can cause symptoms on its own. This is another basic rule that I talk about all the time. People are often saying it's all about emotions, but it isn't. A lot of times the emotion of the moment is past, and now doubt or fear or confusion or questions has taken over. Doubt is responsible for the chronic aspect of symptoms. Again, emotions, acute. Doubt, chronic. Doubt and fear matter even if they're in small degrees. This is another rule of thumb. You may need help getting doubts articulated and answered, but that is the goal. With respect to the power column, power is responsible for plateaus. When you're getting better, but you don't get to the full point and you get stuck, that tends to be a power issue. These are all rules of thumb. Any issue can exist in all 3 columns, but it takes on the form of that column. Okay, so as an example, abuse could be an emotional theme, what it did to you. But in the doubt column, abuse could take on the form of what doubts came from that abuse. Like, do you have doubts trusting your own reality now? So the same issue can go across columns. In the power column, it could be abuse could be about what did it do to your power dynamics? Does it make you give away power all the time? So the columns affect and relate to each other, but this can be pinpointed. That's the thing you need to know, is that it all can be understood. You're not going to get answers to questions if you don't go with the assumption that you make sense and this process makes sense, but I can assure you it does because I found it over and over again. Here's another couple rules of thumb. Mind-body issues are always shifting, so we must understand each moment. You can't rest on your laurels. We're always changing. But if you know the system, then you've got a flexible system that you always can understand. Understanding it correctly always works, and you need the general framework to have it understood, but you also need to nail the specifics for relief. So that might sound contradictory, but it really isn't. You use the general framework to get at the specifics. That's how you get the information. It sounds contradictory, but it's actually not. So you need to know that the experts tend to only understand certain parts of things. I find this all the time. I do try to pride myself on knowing the full bandwidth of the whole thing because that's what people are coming to me for. So I encourage you, ask your questions, get them answered. That is the guide you need. If there is a contradiction, a seeming contradiction, find someone like me who can get it resolved for you, and don't be shy about it. I don't want you thinking, oh, I don't want to offend him by asking this seemingly contradictory question. No, that's the meat of getting better from things. Ask things when they seem contradictory. Why is it so important? Because contradictions lead to doubt. So I won't tolerate them. That is why I go in on all contradictions and I try to be able to explain something in a system that makes sense overall. A lot of times they are just seeming contradictions, but I can help you resolve them. And you're absolutely right to not accept them as they are. You shouldn't be stuck with contradictions. That leaves you confused, unclear how to go forward. So I'm hoping that these guidelines, these rules of thumb, and recognizing that it's not too complex to understand, there are things you can rely on to get at the specifics. I look forward to hearing what you guys think about this. It's an important topic, and we'll keep talking about it. But if you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.